What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so this is a requested video from one of my subscribers. They wanted me to do a video comparing head coaches Jerry Sloan and Rick Carlisle. I guess giving an opinion as to who was the greater of the two. And this is one of the closer comparisons. I really don't know if you'll go wrong picking one or the other in this scenario, where Rick Carlisle has the advantage as far as having won a championship as a head coach. Jerry Sloan is probably considered the greatest coach in NBA history not to win a championship ring. And you can argue that Carlisle had more talent to work with over his career than Jerry Sloan, although Jerry Sloan did coach one of the greatest tandems in Stockton, or duo, in Stockton and Malone. Both of them were NBA players. Jerry Sloan was the better of the two, although once again in this comparison, Rick Carlisle was the one that won a championship. He was a backup on that '86 Celtic team that is one of the greatest one of the greatest teams of all time, won a championship that year. I think Rick Carlisle played something around 4 years in the NBA. I think from '84 to '87, and then I think most of the '88-'89 season he played in the NBA, and then he retired. Jerry Sloan played from 1965 to 1976, and he started, unlike Carlisle, and he was on those really good Chicago Bulls teams of the 1970s that just couldn't get over the hump. They were really good. Back then, the Chicago Bulls were in the Western Conference, and those were those teams that had players like Tom Burwinkle, Butterbean Bob Love, Chet Walker, Norman Van Leer. Those were that teams, and I think the best they ever did, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but I think they went to the Western Conference Finals. It might have been 1975. But anyway, he retired in 1976. And I think I'm going to start with maybe Rick Carlisle. Rick Carlisle in 1989 became an assistant with the then New Jersey Nets. And first he served Bill Fitch as an assistant. And then later on, in 1992, after I believe he was fired by the Pistons, Chuck Daly became the new head coach of the Nets, and he served as an assistant under Bill Fitch. Later on, Carlisle became an assistant under the Portland Trailblazers, with the Portland Trailblazers, under head coach P.J. Carlissimo. And then Rick Carlisle became an assistant under the legendary Larry Bird, his former teammate, when Bird became the head coach of the Pacers back in 1997. That's you might recall Bird had a great head coaching staff under him, led by Rick Carlisle, who was being groomed to be Larry Bird's replacement when Bird retired as head coach. You may remember those Pacers went to the conference finals back in 1998 with the Chicago Bulls barely escaping with their lives in a 7-game series. That Pacer team would go on to the NBA Finals in 2000 before losing in 6 games to the 67-win Lakers team led by Shaq and Kobe. Larry Bird retired in 2000 as the head coach. Donnie Walsh, who was the CEO of the Indiana Pacers, was not persuaded by Larry Bird to hire Rick Carlisle as his replacement, as he hired his friend Isaiah Thomas. So then Rick Carlisle, at that time, received an offer to be head coach of the Detroit Pistons. Now, this is the time when the Pistons were led by Jerry Stackhouse. But from 2001 to 2003, which is when he coached that team, Rick Carlisle, they had 50-win seasons, but they just can't get over the hump as far as winning a championship or even going to the NBA Finals. Rick Carlisle was fired in 2003 by the Detroit Pistons and replaced by Larry Brown, who, interestingly enough, that prior season had eliminated Carlisle's team when he was the coach of the Sixers, Larry Brown. So, after he was replaced in Detroit by Larry Brown, Rick Carlisle then became the head coach of the Pacers, because by then, Isaiah Thomas had failed as being the head coach of the Pacers. He was fired, and then replaced by Rick Carlisle. Rick Carlisle, in my opinion, probably, well, I'm not going to say probably, but he had a good chance of winning a championship with that Pacers squad had it not been for the malice at the Palace, November 2004. Because at first, those Pacers teams were pretty damn good. They were really, really good. But the malice at the Palace screwed everything up. It almost ruined the career of Ron Artest. He was never the same player after the malice at the Palace, from an offensive standpoint. I think it stunted his development as an offensive player. Steven Jackson was on that squad. Jermaine O'Neal had injury issues shortly after that situation in the suspension. Reggie Miller retired after 2004, 2005. I think that year they possibly could have won a championship, but it never happened. So after the departure of some of those players and the retirement of Reggie Miller, the Pacers just weren't really good, okay? And it sort of fell off. And I think they missed the playoffs in 2006, 2007, and then Rick Carlisle was fired by Larry Bird. He spent a year as an analyst, and then I think it was in 2007 or 2008, Rick Carlisle became the head coach of the Dallas Mavericks. And of course, this is that team that had Dirk Nowitzki, J.J. Barrera, LeBron James Kryptonite. It's a team that had Jason Terry, Josh Howard, Jason Kidd. At that point, Jason Kidd had left the Nets and signed with the Mavericks. And ultimately, that team won a championship in 2011. That's the high watershed moment of Rick Carlisle's coaching career. And then, for the duration of Dirk Nowitzki's career, into the first couple years of Luka Doncic's career, Rick Carlisle remained as head coach, but in my opinion, the prima donna that is Luka Doncic, that does not get called out enough by the media, clashed with Rick Carlisle. And then Rick Carlisle stepped down as the head coach of the Dallas Mavericks. I believe, quite honestly, that he was fired by the Mavericks, but to save face, he was allowed to publicly, quote, step down. And then since 2021, he's been the head coach of the Pacers. Now, his overall record is good. The percentage is not that great, though. He's won 896 games, lost 793. So that's a 53% win percentage. Now, to be fair, the last few years have cut into that percentage. After the later years of Dirk Nowitzki's career, starting around 2016, those teams were pretty bad. Into maybe the first year or so of Luka Doncic's career. Then, of course, up until this year, the Pacers weren't really that good, but things have turned around, obviously, a little bit with the Pacers, a little bit. So his percentage isn't that great. He has a losing percentage in the playoffs. 63 victories, 70 defeats, a 47.4% win percentage. He didn't make the playoffs in his career, Rick Carlisle, one, two, three, four, five, six, 7 times, and I believe 22 years. That's not bad. You know what I'm saying? That's not bad. As far as his accolades as a head coach, Rick Carlisle won the championship in 2011. He was NBA Coach of the Year 2001, 2002, and was the All-Star Game head coach back in 2004. Jerry Sloan, after he retired as a player in 1976, was offered a position as a coach in college, but he didn't take that position. I think it was a position for in the Evansville Purple Aces. He coached that team for 5 games and then quit. Now, what's so interesting about that is that him quitting that team as the coach more than likely saved his life, because later on that season, his replacement and that team perished in a plane crash later that season. So that more than likely saved his life. Jerry Sloan later on became an assistant with the Chicago Bulls. He became an assistant coach. And then in 1979, he became the head coach of the Chicago Bulls from 1979 to 1982. And those years, they weren't very good, obviously. They weren't very good. This was the pre-Michael Jordan years. And then, I think from 1985 to 1988, he was an assistant head coach with the Utah Jazz under Frank Layden. Frank Layden resigned as head coach and became, I think he was general manager of the Utah Jazz in December of 1988, and he hired Jerry Sloan, his assistant, as the head coach, and then one of the great coaching runs began. Jerry Sloan coaching Stockton and Malone. They became one of the top teams in the NBA at that time. Trying to look at the overall record for Jerry Sloan. Yeah, his first year when he became head coach, he coached 65 games for Utah. They went 40-25. Over the course of his career, he never won fewer until 2004. He never won fewer than 44 games in a regular season, often winning 50 to 60 plus games with Stockton and Malone. They went to the finals back in 1997-98. They're the only team not to win a championship to go to the finals more than once during that decade. And, you can make an argument that Michael Jordan possibly prevented that team from winning 1, maybe 2 championships. Because I don't know if they would have beaten, I'm pretty sure they would have beaten Miami in 1997 if somehow they had beat Chicago. I think they probably would have beaten the Pacers, though I'm not certain of that. But I know they would have beaten Miami had they played Miami in 1997 in the final. I don't see how they would have lost to Miami, even though I know Miami's a great defensive team. I think that Miami would have struggled with the pick and roll terribly if they had played them in the finals. But anyway, Jerry Sloan's Utah Jazz also had a tendency in the playoffs to face some of the toughest matchups. Whether you're talking about even before Jerry Sloan got there, with Stockton Malone's first run in the playoffs, they faced the Showtime Lakers. I think they also faced those Dallas Maverick teams in the 80s. They faced Tom Chambers' Suns, Run TMC, Clyde Drexler's Portland Trailblazers. I'm just talking about different teams they faced during the entire Jerry Sloan run era. They faced, the Denver Nuggets with the Dikembe Mutombo and Mabu Abdul-Rauf. They faced the Sonics teams with, Gary Payton and Sean Kemp, David Robinson Spurs, later on Tim Duncan Spurs, Hakeem's Rockets, Charles Barkley's Suns, later on, Dirk's Mavericks teams, Chris Webber's Kings. They faced them all. Shaq and Kobe's Lakers, who they throttled in 97 and 98. Phil Jackson admitted that when he became the head coach of the Lakers in 99, that his team often tried to do everything they could to duck the Jazz in the playoffs because they noticed how much they struggled with the pick and roll. And many other teams, they struggled with them. So, many other teams they played in that stretch. Jerry Sloan never won a championship. But nobody liked playing the Utah Jazz. And they didn't have, like I said, the greatest talent, but they were one of the most disciplined teams. Especially during the Stockton Malone era, they were one of the most disciplined teams in the NBA, often looking for the best shot. They were very, very good at getting the best guy open for a shot. For the era in the 90s, they took very few three-pointers. And the only guys that did take three-pointers usually were the guys who could shoot them, whether it's Jeff Hornacek, John Stockton. Because of that, because of their tendency to get shots in the paint or open mid-range shots or shots close to the basket, they led the NBA in field goal percentage, generally speaking. Overall, in his career, Jerry Sloan won 1,221 games, lost 803 for a 60.3% win percentage. In the playoffs, though, he went 98 and 104 for a 485 win percentage. So that was not great. And by the way, Jerry Sloan resigned as head coach back in 2011, about midway through the season, basically because he was forced out because of Deron Williams and not getting along with him. Deron Williams did not like Jerry Sloan. And this is the beginning of the spoiled, pampered, multimillionaire player age. That you couldn't talk to these guys the same way that you could talk to players of the past. They got so offended and whatnot. It's just gotten worse since Deron Williams, his generation. Man, I really don't know who to pick, to be honest with you. I mean, by default, you could go Rick Carlisle because he won a championship. You could. But man, I mean, Rick Carlisle did coach a team that beat LeBron James in the finals, right? And that was a series that they were not supposed to win on paper. Then again, Utah lost, but they lost to the Bulls, but they probably gave the Bulls their best challenge. Even though they didn't go to 7 games in either of those finals, It took every little ounce of Michael Jordan to get them through, especially '98. And they did beat a much more talented on paper team in the Lakers twice in '97, '98. And if it wasn't for the fact that they lost Game 7 against the Sonics in '96, they would have went to 3 consecutive NBA Finals: '96, '97, and '98. Then you people forget that, Utah beat a team that was also considered better on paper in the Houston Rockets in '97. Stockton hit that. You know what? I'm gonna go with Jerry Sloan by an inch. I'm gonna go with Jerry Sloan by an inch. Something about Rick Carlisle, maybe it's the win percentage, but something about Rick Carlisle, even though he has that championship, tells me he falls just a little shy of that top 15 coach. He doesn't quite feel like a top 15, 20 coach. He feels like more of a top 30 coach, where Jerry Sloan feels a little bit more comfortable, despite the losing win percentage in the playoffs. I can kind of attribute that to the teams that they played. You know what I mean? Plus, toward the end of Jerry Sloan's career, those Jazz teams weren't as good after Stockton went on. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and just give the edge to Jerry Sloan. Tell me what you guys think.